The night of the 19th of July 1993 is a nightmare for the Nepalese, a nightmare of massive destruction and loss of life, a nightmare caused by natural disaster. Nepal is a small mountainous country susceptible to flood, debris flow, landslides and earthquakes. But the July 1993 disaster was the worst in the history of Nepal. Normally, the monsoon occurs in Nepal from around May through to September each year. The harvest of the main crops, which is to last for the entire year, depends on a favorable monsoon season. Nepal, an underdeveloped country, does not have sufficient irrigation facilities or a modern agricultural system to ensure a good harvest. Nature, at times benevolent, plays a major role in Nepal's agro-based economy. But this year, nature turned cruel. Weather patterns over the globe in mid-July 1993 show a low-pressure zone over the regions of East Africa, South Asia, and the West Pacific. The low pressure centered over mid-Nepal caused unexpected and sudden climatic imbalances. Heavy and incessant rainfall for 3 days from the 19th to the 21st of July 1993 broke all past records. The river flow in many places, especially in the central region, became dangerously high. The maximum rainfall recorded was 540 millimeters, with nighttime rainfall alone of 64 millimeters per hour at Tistun in Makwanpur district. The river water was the greatest experienced on many rivers in Nepal, much greater than the design discharge of major infrastructures such as barrages, hydropower plants, embankments, bridges and roads, causing the destruction of these structures. The most affected areas of the floods were downstream areas of the Bagmati, East Rapti and other rivulets. The devastation due to the damage of the eastern and western canals and flooding of the Bagmati River cost 798 human lives, uprooted over 30,200 families, and caused a land loss of 27,332 hectares in Sarlahi and Rautar districts on either side of the river. Many villages located on the islands of the river or by the river banks were destroyed. The most severely affected was Sankarpura village in Sarlahi on the eastern side of the river, where as many as 233 persons lost their lives. Ruins of a few uninhabited houses remain even months after the disaster. Near the border with India, Gaur municipality with a population of more than 20,000 was steeped in floodwaters for weeks, with water levels of over 2 meters. In the East Rapti River, the banks were breached in Chitwan district and the rapid flow overran several villages. 5,300 families were affected and 22 persons died. Over 2,800 houses were totally or partly damaged. 1,522 hectares of irrigated land was buried under sand. These people were not aware of the impending danger when the floods hit their villages, because the heavy rainfall was upstream, while the rainfall was less in the downstream areas. Suddenly, a peaceful night turned into a nightmare. While attempting to save themselves from the midnight floods, some were swept away with their houses. Many clung to their cattle and to trees, but to no avail. Many more died attempting to save family members. They do know all this, and yet what can they do? There is no way out. There is no choice. In mountain areas, landslides and debris flows are major causes of disaster. In Makwanpur district, the floods were compounded by landslides. 242 persons in the district died in the disaster, and 14,748 families were affected. Over 3,600 houses were partly or completely damaged. 4,656 hectares of cultivated land was destroyed. Houses were swept away without trace or buried under rubble and boulders. One village, Fedi in Palung Village Development Committee, was perhaps one of the worst affected in the district. Before the disaster, Fedi village was surrounded by two small mountain streams. Debris flow from these two streams converged upstream of the village and hit the village head-on. Once a peaceful village, it is now a sea of debris. 64 people were killed in this village alone. Other major disasters triggered by the heavy rains of July 19 in the mountain areas were the floods and landslides in Sindhuli. The Marine Kola River breached its banks in many areas in Sindhuli before joining the Bagmati upstream from the site of the barrage. Dhading and Kavre Palanchok districts were similarly affected. Together, these disasters claimed another 94 lives. Affected 15,152 families and 4,475 houses were completely or partially destroyed. Standing crop on over 6,100 hectares of land was completely wiped out. There are many more similar villages, similar only in the devastation and havoc. All that is seen now are the ruins, the floating animal carcasses, the broken pieces of meager household goods, sand and gravel, sand and gravel. Thousands of hectares of land have been turned into desert, piled up with more than a meter of sand. Once, this was a happy settlement, happy homes, smiling faces, green fields waving in the soft breeze. Now, there are only stark boulders and silent sand. Is this a dream, or is it a nightmare? In order to help the people out of this isolation and helplessness, the army, police and other government agencies, NGOs and the local people took prompt action for relief. These efforts were coordinated by the National Relief Coordination Committee. In view of the magnitude of the disaster and the seriousness of the situation, the government made an international appeal for assistance immediately after the disaster. The United Nations and other international organizations, friendly nations, and INGOs promptly responded to this appeal and provided assistance in cash and kind and teams for relief operations and medical treatment. A Prime Minister's Natural Disaster Relief Fund was set up, as were service centers at the central, regional, district, and local levels to provide emergency relief supplies such as food, medicines, and clothes to the victims. Besides the distribution of emergency supplies, the immediate relief effort included the construction of temporary shelter and disbursement of interest-free loans to farmers for the purchase of farm inputs. Apart from the direct damage to the people in the affected areas, the people in Kathmandu also had to endure hardships. The capital remained virtually cut off from its vital supply routes for over a month. The main highways of Nepal, Prithvi Highway and Tribhuvan Highway, were severely damaged in many places. Some sections were covered by landslides from above, and some sections did not exist anymore due to scouring from below. Many bridges were washed away. Rising prices and scarcity became matters of deep concern among the people of Kathmandu. People had to stand in long queues for hours on end for items of daily necessity. Sugar, kerosene, diesel, petrol, and cooking gas were all in short supply. The major hydropower plant, Kulekhani No. 1 and Kulekhani No. 2, were also severely damaged. Debris flow caused by the incessant rain of July 19, 1993 brought thousands of tons of boulders down the mountain streams and broke away the penstock pipe of Kulekhani plant number 1. The intake for plant 2 and the check dams were also damaged by the boulders brought down by the floods. And all this happened at a time when the people were having to bear the burden of power shedding owing to only 203 megawatts of power being produced to meet the demand for 250 megawatts. The damage to the Kulekhani hydropower projects meant a shortfall of 45% in the national power output. Nepal was yanked back into the dark ages. Candles and oil lamps came into use again. This interruption in the regular supply of electricity in a water resources-rich country like Nepal affected every industry, factory, and mill. Production declined, and the economy of the country has been adversely affected for a long time to come. Barely 3 weeks after the initial heavy rains, another deluge occurred on the 8th and 9th of August. The districts of Panchthar and Taplejung in northeast Nepal were particularly hard hit. 50 people were killed and 1,926 families affected. 181 houses were completely or partially destroyed by landslides and debris flow. The magnitude of the disasters now spread from east to west. And since the initial rains 2 months ago, 44 of the total 75 districts are now affected. The disaster has so far claimed 1,259 lives. 301 persons are still accounted for. In all, 73,606 families have been affected. 30,043 houses are fully or partially damaged. 43,330 hectares of fertile land have been washed away. About 26,000 heads of cattle have also perished. The damage to infrastructures has also been heavy. About 367 kilometers of road have been damaged. 213 permanent, wooden, and suspension bridges have been washed away. 38 large and small irrigation projects and thousands of farmers-managed irrigation schemes have also been destroyed. 449 school blocks, hospitals, and other government buildings have been washed away. This new set of disasters struck when Nepal had hardly recovered from the devastation of the earthquake of 1988, which ran up huge costs in post-earthquake reconstruction. It is indeed a daunting task for an underdeveloped country such as Nepal to face up single-handedly to another bout of restoration on the shattered fabric of rural life. The renewal of infrastructures and the rehabilitation of displaced citizens is as challenging now as it was in 1988. But the magnitude of this year's disasters makes the task even more demanding. One thing is certain though, the reconstruction will push back the nation's development aspirations by decades, and the state of the economy being what it is, Nepal is bound to reel under the reconstruction costs of billions of dollars. Be it the solitary cry of the helpless victim, or the shock of a family losing their beloved ones, or be it the burden of the entire nation staggering under a ravished economy, Nepal is in search of a way to overcome this plight.